Okay, hi everyone. A belated happy Constitution Day. Constitution Day was September 17th. We had our celebration today. In fact, those of you here, Congress imposed a mandate which said that any school that accepts federal funding, which is basically all of them, except Hillsdale, is required to have a program on Constitution Day about the Constitution. I firmly believe that law is unconstitutional. It's a violation of the First Amendment. Congress can't tell you what to say. So we schedule it every year, usually not on September 17th, not as an act of defiance, but I treat it that way, but as an act of volition to talk about the Constitution without a constitutional mandate. So happy Constitution Day to all of you. Any questions before we get started? I'll go over the schedule in a minute, but any general questions on your mind? Yes?
I just have one. It's about Times v. State of Louisiana.
Okay.
How does the ruling not clash with the Fourth Amendment?
With the what amendment?
The Fourth Amendment.
The Fourth Amendment.
Against the unlawful seizures.
Hold on, I gotta plug my computer. I don't understand. Why is HOD a violation of the Fourth Amendment?
Or I'm sorry, Chisolm v. Georgia.
Why is that a violation of the Fourth Amendment?
Because in Chisolm v. Georgia, the government basically took his
Fifth Amendment. Takings clause.
Okay.
Well, actually, so the facts in Chisolm, as you recall, is that the government contracted to get some clothes from this provider, and they didn't pay for it, right? That, if anything, is a violation of the Contracts Clause. What you're thinking of is the Fifth Amendment Takings Clause, that they took property without compensation. But in fact, it was a violation of the Contracts Clause, which is the state can't abrogate contracts. And that's actually why the case was in court, right? So the Supreme Court allowed the suit to proceed under the Contracts Clause. Make sense?
Yes.
Good. All right, any other general questions? I appreciate you thinking about Chisolm all weekend. It brings a warmth to my heart. Any other questions in your mind? Okay. All right. So I sent you all an email yesterday which sent out revised dates for the makeups. I don't like scheduling makeup sessions, but with the storm, we have to. So the schedule is we have class today, the 19th. The first makeup is going to actually be on the 22nd. Rosh Hashanah is on Thursday. Good Yontif to all my members of the tribe. So I had scheduled this at some point early in the semester. So the class will be on Friday, same time, 2 o'clock, room 414. This room wasn't available. I don't know why. Makes me unhappy. I like everyone sitting where they're supposed to. It's actually very disruptive to go to a class with people sitting in different places. I don't like it, but I can't stop it. So all the makeups were room 414. The first one's going to be on this Friday, the 22nd, 2 o'clock, same time as usual. If you can't attend, that's fine. What I need you to do is email me to certify that you watched the video within a week, okay? I'll give you a week to watch it so you have some time. You can watch it live, you can watch it on demand, doesn't really matter to me, but you have to watch it and certify by email. That will be my way of certifying that you watched it. The second makeup will be this Sunday, the 24th. And that's going to be at noon, right? Noon, Sunday at noon. I'm sorry, no, my first class at noon, sorry, 2 o'clock, I'm sorry. I'm doing back-to-back, all my classes for property and ConLaw, so I'm going to be here basically all weekend. But Sunday, you're going to be at 2 o'clock. Oh, wait a minute, I told you the wrong thing. I'm sorry. I forgot what class I'm in. I'm so sorry. Scratch that. On the 22nd, ConLaw will start at 2 o'clock. I'm sorry. I was thinking about my other section, and I inverted you, so I apologize. Let me type it out here. Okay. So on 9/22nd, it's going to be at 2 o'clock. Okay.
You said room 414.
Yeah, room 414. Okay. The next makeup class is going to be on Sunday, the 24th. Also at 2 o'clock, room 414. And the final makeup is going to be on, I think I spaced it out a little bit, October 8th. Also 2 o'clock and 4 and 4. I'm sorry. These are your makeup dates and time. Again, you don't have to be there in person. Watch the video. Email me that you watched it. I will mark you present. We'll take care of it that way. So I'll be as fair as I can. A couple of you, so the effect of this rescheduling is that you have one less class in the midterm than you did before. The midterm date's staying the same. I can't move it. The midterm date is going to be October 3rd. So instead of having 13 classes before, you'll have 12. I'm sorry, instead of having 14 classes before, you'll have 13. So there's one fewer class for you to study. I don't think anyone will cry over that. But it'll make it a little bit easier for you guys to prepare for the midterm. Okay? Everyone understand? So any questions about the schedule? Yeah, I hate doing weekend classes, but it's the most people I can get in one place. Because I do nights, it just doesn't work. So it's unfortunate. I want to talk about the midterm for a minute while I have you on this topic. I'm somewhat unique in that I post all of my old exams. They're all available with a PDF. When I was in law school, you had to go to this office and actually pay for copies of old exams. It never made sense to me. Why are the professors selling me stupid 5 cents a page copies of his old exams? So I put it for free. They're free. I list all of them. I want all of you to take at least one midterm before you sit for your own midterm. Now, I'm going to caveat this. You're not going to be able to answer some of the questions because I've restructured the class. There are going to be some things which you're not going to know, and that's fine. I can't help that because I've reorganized the class a bit. But the way to study for my exams is by taking my old exams. And when I say take it, I don't mean just look at it. I mean go to the library for 90 minutes, quiet, turn off your internet, right? Turn off your phone, bring your outline, print it out, because you can't have a computer on the exam. You can't have like electronic notes. Print out your notes and try and take an exam for real. Trust me on this. You will learn more in that 90 minutes than you'll learn in 8 hours of studying your notes. Because frankly, looking at your notes doesn't teach you anything. Every semester after the exam, I require everyone to meet with me for 30 minutes. And I'll give you the opportunity to do that. But without fail, when students come to my office after the exam, and I say to them, you know, Sally, Jim, how did you study for the exam? Oh, I looked over my notes. The answer is the same every year. I looked over my notes. I looked over my notes. If you tell me your preparation was looking over your notes, I will reply to you, you didn't study, that's why you got a bad grade. I'm warning you, this is exactly what I'm going to tell you. What I want to hear from you is that you actually tried in earnest to sit for 90 minutes in quiet and took the old exam. You can take 2017, 2016, I don't care which one, pick one. Doesn't matter to me. But take it in earnest and review it. Look over the A+ answer afterwards. And you will be so much better prepared to actually sit for my exam. Okay? Everyone understand that? So I don't want one of you to tell me I looked over my notes. If that's all you got, I'm going to say that's fine. That's why you got a C, without fail. Okay? Now I want to walk you through my midterm from last spring to give you a sense of what it looks like. Right here, spring 2017 midterm. So this is from a couple months ago. Okay? So the format is the same every year, right? You have 90 minutes. I mean, our class is 2 hours, but the exams you have 90 minutes. Oh yeah, don't screw that up. Our class is 2 hours, but you have 90 minutes for the midterm. Every year someone screws it up. It says it right here. You have 90 minutes to complete the exam in big, bold letters. So don't fail to budget your time properly. You have 90 minutes to complete the exam. One essay with a 1,000-word limit. Now you ask me, Josh, why do you have a word limit? The reason why is it promotes fairness in a way you may not appreciate. I can't compare a student who writes 1,000 words and some student who vomits 5,000 words. I can't compare that because one has so much more stuff than the other. By limiting your word count puts everyone on a playing field that's equal. Everyone's in the same playing field. Or if you're an artist, everyone has the same canvas to work with, right? It's not one person painting a portrait and someone painting a mural. You all have the same canvas size to work with. There's a word count feature in your exam software. If you don't know how to use it, go talk to the registrar. They'll show you. I don't want any of you to come and say, I couldn't do the word count. you have to take care of this stuff in advance. And if you can't figure it out for a reason, use your finger and count. It doesn't take very long. If you write it by hand, I want a word count also. You're not excused from the rules. It takes a minute to do. I'm going to say this once. Do not do a character count. Does everyone know the difference between a word and a character, right? A character is like a letter, A, B, C. A word is like apple. Every semester, at least one student writes 1,000 characters. That is equivalent of 5 text messages. You're laughing, but that's an F. Don't laugh. One of you will do it. I don't know who it's going to be, but one of you will freak out and write 1,000 characters. It's an F. Don't do it. I can't pass you if you do that. You're giving me 5 sentences. Give me 1,000 words. Okay? I warned you, and if you do that, it's on you. I didn't do that one semester. I failed to have the warning, and 3 people gave me 1,000 characters. So I hope my warnings are heeded. I don't want to fail you. I really don't. It's not my interest to fail anyone. I don't want to fail anyone. When you look at the question, the first thing you should read, and this will seem obvious, is the instructions. The number one reason why people get a C or lower is they don't answer the questions I ask. They do something else. If you just do what I say, you're probably going to get a B. Even if you're not right, you're probably going to track for a B. So they'll always say something like this. What time frame are you in? On the final exam, we'll have 2 questions. One question is premised in the current day, 2017. Another question we premise at some point in the past. I want you to be able to trace doctrine. The midterm, this one I said the year is 2017. You're a law clerk. This is, I think, was about the travel ban, back before it was even a big deal, which is pretty early on. The judge asked you to write a memo of 1,000 words addressing the case. Okay. After you read the instructions, I want you to jump down. The fact pattern is usually 1 or 2 pages long. They won't be very long, but I want you to jump down to the prompt. The prompt is telling you exactly what I want you to know. Okay? This is telling you what questions are you supposed to answer. There will be 5 questions. Do the math. If there are 5 questions and you have 1,000 words, that means each question is about 200 words, right? Don't go over the word limit, because I stopped reading at 1,000 words. Stay in your lanes. Okay? Read the 5 prompts of the question so you know exactly what I'm looking for. Again, the difference between a B and a C is a C paper doesn't answer the question. You can get a B by giving me a wrong answer so long as you're answering the correct question, right? If it's a question about the Commerce Clause, don't start talking about the taxing power. Right? If it's a question about, you know, I don't know, like, you know, the executive power, don't tell me about, you know, Marbury, right? Give me what I need to know. All right? And I'll give you another tip. As you read each question, write in the margin next to the question a brief summary of the question, like 1 or 2 words. So this one, right? Okay, federalism, right? So write in the margin federalism next to it. Why are you doing this? Because you don't have to read the questions over and over again. So if you can write a 1-word description of the question, you now have in your margin a good table of contents. So after you read the 5 questions, go back and read the prompt, right? And as you read the prompt, write in the margin, oh, this relates to question number 1, federalism. This relates to question number 2, commandeering doctrine, right? Mark up your paper so you know which parts of the exam relate to which questions. That way you don't have to read it over and over and over again. That makes sense. Another reason why people fail the exam, it happens every semester, is they don't finish. If you don't finish, you're probably not going to pass. There's more than enough time in 90 minutes to do this entire exam. More than enough time. But if you don't budget yourself well. So let's do some simple math, right? Let's say you take 30 minutes to read the question, right? 30 minutes to read the question. That's probably generous. I'll get 30 minutes. It means you have an hour left over. You have 5 questions in an hour. That means you have 12 minutes per question. Right? Not 20. I know a couple of you are thinking 20. The answer is not 20. It's 12. If you have 12 minutes per question, if you spend 20 minutes on your first question, that means you're going to run out. You're not going to finish 5. I can't tell you in papers I grade where number 5 is blank. It happens. If you leave number 5 blank, you're probably going to get a C or lower. You can't get much higher than that. I'm not trying to scare you, but I hope I am, because there are ways to avoid getting a bad grade on this exam. And the grade you get on the midterm will almost certainly be your final grade. Very few students move up. Some students move down, it happens. But very few students move up. So treat this as you would treat a final exam. Please, I mean that sincerely. I will work with you, but if you blow this off, I can't do much for you. Right? This is why it's the midpoint class that we can correct your course. But if you don't take this seriously, you can't start a good outline, you know, in November. It's not physically possible. I mentioned this once before, but there's a special incentive, right? So the musical Hamilton, right, which is a world reclaimed, is coming to Houston in April. I have 4 tickets. The highest score in this midterm gets a ticket. I'll do the same for my property class in the spring also, both my sections. So you all go to the show together. It might be at different nights, but there'll be 2 and 2, I think. And you can go see the show. But that is my incentive. I want you to take this as seriously as possible, because I don't want anyone to screw this up and then for the final be left in the wind. Right? I want you to do this. And what I want to talk about on the midterm is, okay, here's you got the answer wrong, but you did the right thing, right? You were in the right framework, but you didn't quite get it right. I want to have that conversation. I don't want to be saying, what are you doing? You answered the wrong question. Why did you leave that blank? Did you not finish? Right? It kills me to have those questions because we can address that in advance. We can work on that now. But once you get there, it's like, yeah, I didn't finish, and oh, I just looked over my notes, my outline wasn't in good shape. There's not much I can do for you. That's on you at that point. But if your answer is, yeah, I knew it was a commerce clause, but I thought it was, I thought this was economic activity. I'm like, okay, I can have a conversation. And to make this even easier for you, the exam does not have one right question and one right answer. If you look at the A+ answer, you may disagree with it, and your answer may be just as good. Maybe not, maybe yes. But I accept a range of answers. The exam is written specifically because there are different answers to questions in constitutional law. There's never a single right answer. If this class has been any lesson for you, it's usually, it depends. But you have to give me an answer and explain why. Okay? So take this seriously. October 3rd, your midterm. I'll get someone to proctor. I won't be there. I'm not allowed to be here when exams are administered. It's a weird school rule. My very first semester, when the students were taking their final, I showed up to bring say, hey everyone, good luck, and they basically threw me out of the room. So I won't be here, but someone will proctor it for you. I don't know who. Okay. Anyone else questions? Take this seriously. Take 2 of the midterms even. Take all 3. I don't know if you have time, but take at least 1. Okay? Yeah.
Just to clarify, it's open notes.
Whatever you want that's printed. You can't use your iPad, can't use your laptop.
So you can't write, we're not typing it?
No, you are typing. It was ExamSoft.
Oh, okay.
The way, yeah, you'll get information from the registrar soon of how to use ExamSoft. But the way the ExamSoft works is it locks on your computer. You can't look at anything else. Right? Has everyone used ExamSoft before?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a lockdown interface. You boot into it. You can't look at your computer. Once, a couple years ago, students said, can I use my iPad? And it was too difficult because people couldn't cheat, so I said no iPads. Other questions? What else? Yeah.
I'm looking for Iraq.
So, the question was, do you prefer Iraq? Given the word constraints, your focus should be on the A, the analysis. That's what your focus should be on. You're welcome to restate the issue, give me the rule, but the best answer has a strong analysis. And it's easy for me to tell you this, but the better answer is look at the A+ answer from last year and do what they did. Look at the A+ answers and emulate that. That's what you want to do. I won't tell you not to do Iraq, because for some people it's an important crutch. But as second semester, third semester students, you will start to move beyond Iraq. It's a good thing for 1Ls first semesters, but you start developing ways of writing better. If you need it, use it, that's fine, but it may be difficult to do. What else? Also, I should warn you, I have some weird head cold and massive congestion, so speak up today. It's not because I'm deaf, but my left ear is fine. My right ear has not unpopped yet from a flight yesterday, so I can barely hear out of it. So I'll be doing my best. I took a Sudafed. It hasn't kicked in yet, but yes, sir.
And it's not per se like 200 words per question?
No, it's not strict. That would be too difficult to enforce. It's 1,000 for each question. Thank you.
Do you know who provides assistance with ExamSoft?
Registrar. Yeah, just go ask the registrar. They'll tell you. They'll send you an email at some point in the next week or so to download the sanity of your code and everything else. By the way, the exam number you're getting for this class will not be your final exam number. And the reason why is I want to know who you are. So I grade them anonymously, and after I grade them, then I look at the exam numbers and I get them. Because I don't want to know who you are when I grade them. It's not fair. But I do have that number, so I can provide feedback. My first semester, they screwed up, and they didn't give me the exam number, so I was holding the honor system, and half the students never actually showed up. But now I know who you are. Yeah, Jeff?
Is this one essay with 5 parts, or would you like 5 different separate?
Are you talking about exam soft?
No, for the actual exam.
Well, it's one question with 5 subparts.
Okay, but it's just one essay.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, the final will be 2.
Okay.
Right? Basically, the final is double the midterm. So the midterm is a single question in 90 minutes. The final is 2 questions in 3 hours. Make sense? Thank you. Yes, sir.
So just to be clear, that's 1,000 words for the whole thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so midterm will be 1,000 words total, final will be 2,000 words total. Most students don't hit the word limit, which is shocking. But most students don't even hit the word limit. You complain about it, you worry about it. Most students get 700 or 800 words, they're done. Some students find it frustrating and write 999 words. Because they know they can write more, but most students don't even hit the word limit. I used to have a 500 word limit, but there was too much resistance to that, so I dropped it. I think the 500 was fair. It really makes you cut the crap. There's no BSing with 500 words. You can BS a little with 1,000 words, but I'll live with it. Yeah.
Well, the final thing will be I'm sorry, I don't know if you said this right, 2,000 words.
Total. Yep. Final is 2,000 total. Okay, anything else? All right, let's do a question. I put this question up here. I'll put a poll up. The question is this. The executive powers are enumerated. True or false? The executive powers enumerated, true or false? Okay. All right. All right. Ready? What did you got off last time? All right. What'd you put?
I put B, false.
You put false.
I understood it as Congress having enumerated powers and the executive power just enforces these powers.
Well, what does it mean for powers to be enumerated?
Listed? Or explicitly stated?
God, sorry. I've limited hearing. I didn't hear you say anything. Please repeat.
Just like listed and stated.
Okay, listen. Yeah, just please speak up. I had this poor girl in the last row. I had to walk all the way up to here. I feel terrible. Like, I'll go like this. Okay. So this year I got like nothing. This year is fine. It's funny because like this like anti-surround sound principle. Okay, so you said the executive powers are not listed.
Right.
Okay. Well, let's look at our constitutions. Everyone. Turn to Article 2. I think it's on page
41.
41. Thank you. Yes. So turn to page 41, and we go to the very first. And I have it on the board if you don't have it in front of you. We have this very first provision, right? It says Article 2, Section 1. It says the executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. All right. So, Kelsey, what is this executive power they're referring to?
The president.
Well, the president, these powers are vested in the president. But my question is before that, what are the powers that are vested in the president? How do we know what that executive power? You're right. The executive power is vested in the president. There's no doubt about that. But what is that executive power?
The powers listed like in section 2. Like
Oh, wait. But Alyssa just said the executive powers are not enumerated. What do you mean they're listed? You're not wrong, by the way. Not necessarily. But you just said the powers are enumerated. What do you mean powers listed in section 2? What are the powers listed in section 2? Go to the next page, right? Actually, it's so if you go to page 45, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is these powers, Kelsey? You're exactly on the right track.
The president shall be the commander-in-chief of things.
The president should be commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy. Okay. What else can the president do? Just read through it.
And the militia of the states.
Okay, he controls the militia of the states when they're called to service. What else can the president do?
He may require the opinion and writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments.
Okay, keep going.
On any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices.
Okay, keep going. You're
He
right.
shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons.
Well, in the news now, the president can give pardons, right? Okay, what else can he do? Go to the next page, 46.
He shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties.
The president can make treaties. Okay, what else?
Provide 2/3 of senators present conclave.
Okay, so the Senate has to concur the treaties, but he can make them himself. Okay, keep going.
He shall nominate and by with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers, consuls, judges, and the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States.
Okay, so he can appoint people to the executive branch, he can appoint people to the judiciary. Okay. And then the last paragraph, the president shall have power.
The president shall have power to fill up all vacancies that may have happened during recess of the Senate by granting commissions which shall expire at the end of their next session.
Okay. Very good. So, who's right? Is Alyssa right or is Kelsey right? Are the powers of the executive enumerated or not? So, I think they're both right. So, Cortland, right? Where are Congress's powers listed? Which provision of the Constitution?
Is it Article 1?
Yeah, exactly, right? Thank you. See, you guys are already on the right track. You know exactly the articles, you can number them, makes me happy. Article 1, Section 1, it says, right up here, all legislative powers herein granted. And Cortland, what does that mean, powers herein granted? What's the significance of that?
The powers that are, I guess, granted in the Constitution.
In where?
The Constitution.
Which part?
Article 1.
Yes. Congress only has the powers that are granted in Article 1. But Cortland, in contrast, are the president's powers limited to those listed in Article 2?
Doesn't say.
Good answer. Very good answer. So here's the deal, guys, right? Congress's powers are enumerated. There's no question about that. The president has enumerated powers. But he also has some powers that are not enumerated. That is, his powers that are not listed. We might call these inherent powers. That is, they're powers that inhere or that attach to the office by themselves. Right? Mark,
Yes.
how do we know what the president's inherent powers are?
I guess a reasonable interpretation of the take care clause.
Well, we didn't get to the take care clause. What's the take care clause?
I was hoping for you to further explain that.
Well, I can, but you mentioned it. What's the take care clause?
Well, it really wasn't mentioned until the end of the readings today.
Yeah. It's in Article 2, Section 3, page 47. It says, right above where it says Section 4, on page 47. It says,
Okay.
the president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed and shall commission all the officers of the United States, right? But What does that mean? He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, Mark. Well, why did you mention that? I asked you a simple question, I thought. How do you express the inherent powers are? You give me the take care clause. You're moving to the other big thing.
Well, it falls upon his singular shoulders, I suppose, to make sure that the laws that are established by Congress be faithfully executed.
And what means can he use to execute those laws?
The military,
Oh, okay. How do we know that?
because he's the commander-in-chief.
Ah, so I think what we're seeing, I think Mark raised a fair point, is that even though it says the president's commander-in-chief, it doesn't say how he's supposed to exercise his powers, does it?
Right.
Right? Okay. Stop. Go away. Okay. So, Crystal, right? What's the answer then? How do we know what the president's unenumerated powers are? You don't. Who gets to decide what the president's powers are?
I mean, but we know that he has the enumerated powers that are listed, and
Okay.
I think history tells us the majority of his inherent powers. So mixing with the powers that are enumerated and.
But what do you mean history? Are the powers fixed by the Constitution, or what do you mean? How does history, practice, fit into this? Does the executive's actions change what powers he has?
Yeah.
How can, if the president's breaking the Constitution, how does that make it okay if he does it? So what you're saying basically is once the president does it, that makes it okay.
Correct.
That was Richard Nixon, right? He said, if I do it and I'm the president, that makes it legal. And actually, people don't understand what he was saying. I mean, well, Nixon was actually a lawyer. He argued before the Supreme Court. He was 0-1 at the Supreme Court. But his point is basically this, and Justice Jackson makes this point, I think, very eloquently, right, in Youngstown. The powers of the executive are not defined with any specificity. This is not like a bright line rule. It's not like the 4-factor test in torts. So one of the ways to go about deciding what the executive's powers are is by looking to practice. Right? What have presidents in the past done? Do the other branches oppose it? Do they support it? If the other branches supported the president's actions, that's a pretty good indication that the president has that power. If there's a long-standing tradition, which early presidents did one after the other, and no one said anything, that probably means that's right. And this is an important framework for the courts, right? Why? It's important for the courts because they don't have a guidebook to go on. And when the president is in court, generally it's a pretty big deal, right? When the president and his administration hold into court, that's a significant element. This is not like a random, tort case that no one cares about. Not to disparage torts, but, we're talking about like Youngstown, right? The president is fighting a war against Korea. We'll do Korematsu, right? Next week, next class, right? You got people locked up in camps, right? These are significant issues implicating national security. So the courts often don't have a lot to go on. So when they're deciding the scope of the president's powers, practice is important. So the answer to this question, and I'll see what the results were. I think both answers are correct. I'm hoping it's 50-50. Let's see what we got. Oh, beautiful. I mean, look at that. 53-47. I think that's actually a good split. I don't know what the right answer is. My guess, I think the unenumerated is better, but it's a very tough question because he does have powers that are listed, but there's some powers beyond those. All right, any questions on that before we get started? We're already half hour in, but that was good use of time. Let's start now with Hamilton and Federalist number 78. And Hamilton was something of a monarchist. He actually, during the Constitutional Convention, opposed the idea of an elected presidency. He was in favor of basically a life-term dictator, a life-term leader, right? Basically, once the president was elected, he would serve for life, more or less like a monarch. Fortunately, Hamilton's proposal was voted down. There's suspicion he wanted to be that dictator one day, but we'll leave that aside. Hamilton's proposal was voted down. And instead, we now have a structure with a single president, right? And at the time, that was unique. Many states had, instead of a single governor, a council, right? With maybe 3 people, 2 people, whatever it was. And Hamilton wrote this to defend the idea of the unitary executive. And by unitary, like unicycle, right? One. Why does Hamilton think it's so important to have a single executive rather than like a council or a panel of advisors who can do things? Why is that so important?
He gave a number of different things, but I thought the one that stood out to me the most was that if there's 2, there's no accountability.
Ah, why?
Because if there's 2, you never know who the actual decision came from. They can always say, well, we decided this, or it was a compromise.
Yeah. I'll give you an easy example, right? Mom and dad. Mom says no, what do? You ask dad. And dad's like, of course, sweetie, why not? And then mom says, why'd you say yes? Like, well, I don't know, right? So who do you blame, mom or dad? It's very easy when you have multiple people making decisions to try to work around the decision maker. And if mom and dad say no, go ask grandpa, right? Go ask grandma. It's the same idea. So Hamilton, I think, explains with a lot of clarity that with a president that's unitary, the buck stops here, right? That was Harry Truman. The buck stops here. There's no doubt that who's accountable. But there's other examples, right? If there are multiple people, Martin, what's the risk when you have multiple people making decisions? What are people going to try and do to persuade? How are they going to try and handle that situation? Right? Let's say you're a citizen, right? And there's a panel of 3 people. How do you try and finagle it to get your way?
You appeal to the people that are more likely to agree with you.
Yeah. But what can you possibly do to persuade one person or others? What might people try to do that's not so ethical?
Right.
Bribe them, right? When there's more people, there's more opportunities for corruption, right? Because the power is diffused. And when the bureaucracy increases, there's more chance you can have a intrigue, right? Or some sort of corruption scandal. By making it a single person, it's saying, okay, this is the one guy, and he's going to have everyone pulling at him, right? Tugging this direction, that direction. And it decreases the risk of that sort of corruption. Okay? Also, Hamilton talks in concepts that are important. He says that we need a vigorous executive, right? Vigorous, that's the word he uses. Bahar, what does this word vigorous mean? What's the word vigor? You ever hear the word used? You're gonna have to speak up. I can barely hear. I'm sorry. It's not your fault.
He has an emphasis on vigorous executive.
I'm sorry. I can barely hear. Yeah, go ahead. What's vigorous?
I'm not too sure, but I can search it.
Oh, I'll come back to you. Actually, what's a vigorous executive?
Someone who is
Lifeline? Yeah, go for it.
It's in regards to energy, but he uses
Energy, good. Energetic, right? What does that mean, Bahar, to have an energetic executive?
Well, he says unity, duration, inadequate provision for support, and competent powers.
Okay, very good. Bahar, why do you want an energetic executive, right? What's the problem? I'll give you an example, right? Say you have 5 friends and you're trying to pick out where to go for dinner or what movie to watch. Well, how does that discussion usually go?
Not too well.
What? Yeah. Evil done this. You know what I'm talking about, right? Why does it not go well? You have like 5 people trying to pick a restaurant or trying to pick a movie or something. Why does it not go well?
Because they all have different opinions.
Yeah. He wants to go there. She wants to do this. Nothing gets done. You sit there for an hour, and then finally one person's like, all right, screw this. We're going to this movie. Like, okay, whatever, right? You can't have good government like that. When the decision maker is unitary, he's like, you know what? We're going to invade North Korea, that's it. Right? That's a decision, right? Fortunately, the power to declare war is not unitary, but someone can make a decision of what to do unilaterally, right? Now, in contrast, actually, Congress has now 500 something members. Was Hamilton disturbed by Congress having a lot of people and various conflicting voices that they can't make a decision? Is that a bad thing that Congress has so many people they'll be gridlocked all the time?
No,
Why not?
because it's the,
Is it a good thing or a bad thing, according to Hamilton, that Congress can be divided and take its time and have to deliberate? What does Hamilton say?
I think that he says,
Well, even without Hamilton, do you think Congress should be able to move rapidly and make decisions on a dime?
No.
Why
It should be
not?
well thought out and.
Right. So the Senate is often called the world's greatest deliberative body. It's a fancy name, but it says we want the legislature to think things through. Hamilton says we don't want them to move quickly. Right? Let the liberals and let the conservatives fight it out, and maybe they'll meet somewhere in the middle. Or to use James Madison's term, let ambition counteract ambition. Federalist 51. Right? Or 10, I'm sorry. So for Hamilton, a unitary executive has benefits. It's vigorous, energetic, can make decisions quickly. Congress in conflict, which is not unitary, it's plural. Their decisions are going to be slow, laborious, and deliberative, and that's a good thing. And in that sense, Congress can check the president. I use the example of deciding to invade a country, which is something facetious, but the power to declare war is vested in Congress. There's a big question, which maybe we'll talk about another day. Can the president unilaterally use force without declaration of war? There's a debate on it. As a modern matter, the debate's even tougher, because Congress has given the president a lot of authority to use military force without seeking permission first. Under what's called the War Powers Resolution, the executive can use force for up to 2 months, 60 days, without first going to Congress. It's weighty stuff, and the extent to which that 60 days can be extended has been tested in recent years. Leave that there. Okay, so any questions on Hamilton, Federal 70? Took a Sudafed, it's still not popping. I'm going to rip my eardrum out in a minute. It's driving me nuts. Any questions on Hamilton, Federal 70? By the way, if you ever have a head cold, don't fly, because it's one of those painful experiences when you're descending and you have congestion. You feel like your head's going to explode. I've had it happen before. It's really bad. And yesterday with the rain, it was even worse with the funk, So. Yeah.
I have a part of my notes that says unity may be destroyed in 2 ways.
Yeah.
It says by vesting the power in 2 or more magistrates. And the second part is by vesting it ostensibly in one man, subject in whole or in part to the control and cooperation of others. So is it saying that you should have a vigorous leader, but not one that's like subject to the advice of his
let me ask you a
master?
question, right? So if the president wants to fire his Secretary of State, right? Because say the Secretary of State is giving him bad advice. Does the president need Congress's permission to fire the Secretary of State? So actually, I think your answer is correct, but early on there was a very big debate. Does the president need the Senate's permission, right? Does the president need the Senate's permission to remove an officer in his cabinet? In the early days of the Republic, George Washington said the answer was no. The Senate said the answer was maybe. That issue wasn't resolved by the courts until the 1920s. You'll do this in about a week or so when we do the removal power. But the council issue that Emily raised is, what if the people surrounding the president are constraining him? If the president has a duty to take care that the laws are faithfully executed, can he remove those around him who are stopping him from completing that duty? Right? Let's say that, Donald Trump, as president, became so unpopular that his government said, we will not do anything for you. We won't lift a finger for you. could he then fire all of them? Because they're frustrating his duty to execute the laws. Not hypothetical questions. Okay? Any other questions of Hamilton? Perhaps not a satisfactory answer to your question, Emily, but it's the best I can do.
That's good.
All right. Anything else on Hamilton? All right. Let's move to the next case, or the first case, I suppose. Ex Parte Merryman. Now, you're actually fortunate. Remember 2 weeks ago in class, Seth came in, my good friend from Ireland? He's one of the experts on this case, and he's actually going to be cited in the next edition of your book. He wasn't in this one, but he wrote an article recently that changed my own thinking of this case, and I think should change everyone else's thinking. So let me give you some background on the Civil War. When Lincoln was elected, by the time Lincoln was elected, a number of southern states had already seceded from the Union, right? Lincoln was elected, states basically said, screw this, we're out. Before his inauguration, though, there was some uncertainty of what would happen. After his inauguration, it became clear that the southern states would all secede. And the reason why is that President Lincoln could have called out the militia. And what would have happened is he would basically be calling out Southerners to fight their brothers. And that probably was not going to go well. Right? So what happened? The southern states seceded, and they declared a new nation, the Confederate States of America. President Lincoln never recognized this foreign country. He never recognized the Civil War. He never said it was a civil war. He said rather there was rebellion in the southern states. And under his commander-in-chief powers, he said, because these states are in rebellion, I need to take certain actions. Okay? One of those actions, which I think I mentioned during our lecture over lunchtime, was the suspension of the writ habeas corpus. Now, what is habeas corpus? It literally means in Latin, produce the body, right? Corpus Christi, the body of Christ, produce the body. And this was a British writ, excuse me, that was used when the government put someone in jail without any charges. So a judge would literally say, deliver the body to the court and explain to you why you're holding this person. Do you understand? What Lincoln said is that in certain territories in the South, basically almost all of them, I am suspending the writ of habeas corpus. Okay? Now, this is the provision of the Constitution, right? It says the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion of the public safety may require it. It appears in Article 1, Section 9. Emily, I think you're up next, yeah. Mm-hmm. Does the Constitution say who has the power of suspending the writ of habeas corpus in case of rebellion? The text, just read the text.
No, not in that text, but it's in Article 1.
So what do we take from the fact that it's in Article 1?
That those powers are given to Congress.
The powers are given to Congress. Everyone see that, right? So fairly early on in the Republic, Jefferson, as president, announced that I can't suspend habeas corpus by myself. It's a power for the Congress to exercise. Was Jefferson right? Was Jefferson wrong? Lincoln disagreed. While the Civil War was booming, right, and Congress was not in session, Lincoln unilaterally ordered that the writ of habeas corpus should be suspended. Could Lincoln do that? Shivan, where do we get an answer from? Is there even an answer to this question?
I don't.
I read the clause. Emily read it a minute ago. Is there a clear answer to this question?
No.
So how are we supposed to know how to interpret it? What guidance do we have?
I guess we have the guidance of the courts and the judicial system.
Yeah, but you're the judge. You're a law clerk for Justice Taney, right? What do you tell him? The text is silent. We have this issue with Jefferson said you couldn't suspend it. But maybe Jefferson was wrong. He was wrong about a lot of things. How do we know Jefferson was right? What's more useful? That one president said, okay, I'm not going to do this. Another president said, oh, I'm going to do it. Right? They're both presidents. They're both smart lawyers. Why does Jefferson control over Tawney?
I guess because he set a precedent.
Did he set a precedent by saying I can't do this? It was a surrender. Brittany, you're shaking your head.
It's how the other two branches responded to him saying that, right?
Ah, so what happened after Lincoln suspended habeas corpus? What did Congress do?
Didn't they say they're the only ones who have that power?
No.
Oh, no.
What did the Congress do after Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus? It's in your reading. Anyone have it? Anyone know? Yeah.
The court said that only Congress had the power, but
No. What did Congress do
They
after?
made it legal.
What?
They made it legal.
Exactly. Thank you. Congress ratified it. Congress yeah, whatever Lincoln said, right? They said we agree with Lincoln and in fact make it retroactive, so that we basically ratify. We agree with what Lincoln said going back to his day of suspension. So, Kelly, what does that mean if Congress seems to not object when Lincoln did it unilaterally? Congress didn't say, hey, Lincoln, you're off the rails. We're going to stop you. Does that make it constitutional?
No.
Does it make it okay? What do we make of where Congress agrees with the president, takes no action opposite? What does that mean? How should courts look at that, Kelly? China, what do you think? Right, but if the president did something and Congress supported it, and the text is ambiguous, shouldn't the courts maybe back off themselves? Right? Why is Roger Taney any smarter than the hundreds of members of Congress who ratified Lincoln's habeas suspension? He's just one judge here, not even nine. He's acting by himself.
I think he was looking out for a different interest than what Congress and the president were.
But who gets to decide these questions? Why should the court have a monopoly? All the members of Congress agreed that Lincoln was correct. Yeah, Jay, what do you think?
If the Congress had reserved the power to do that, then the courts do have that same power, because the courts are created by the Congress. It's not
Constitution.
Sorry, it's not two different entities. So,
Jay, does Congress have a stronger claim here when the executive takes an action, they bless it, than the judge? I mean, is there one stronger claim than the other?
I would say yes.
Which one's stronger?
The Congress.
So you think Taney was wrong here?
Yes.
Okay. Zara, what do you think? I mean, how is you're Justice Taney's law clerk, right? How do you answer this question, right? If Congress ratified Lincoln's understanding, you have two branches against one, so to speak. Why does the judge think he's smarter and knows more? Not easy questions, are they? By the way, if you can see the preview, this is Jackson, right? This is Justice Jackson's concurrence in Youngstown. I'm giving it to you early, but that's what it is. There aren't any, again, look, it doesn't say Congress in there. It's in Article 1 for sure. That's an argument. But the meaning of our Constitution is written on experience, right? We say there's a gloss, right? Think of like lip gloss, right? You put a covering on top of the Constitution, and the practices of both the executive and the legislative branch help define the meaning of the Constitution. Now, the mere fact that the president does something illegal and Congress blesses it, right? That doesn't mean it's okay. Right? Think of Korematsu will do next week. Right? Congress was all for the president issuing those orders. That was fine. They were okay with it. But the fact that both branches agree with something should give judges perhaps a slight bit of pause before intervening.
Maybe I misunderstood what Congress did. Did Congress ratify the action of suspending the writ of habeas corpus, or did they ratify the president's ability to do that?
Well, they ratified it back to the date Lincoln did it. That's a pretty good endorsement.
Well, because my understanding was they're saying like, okay, we think this is a good policy thing, so we're just also going to agree with it, and that inherently takes the power away from the president to do, because they're saying, now that we've said it's okay, now it's okay.
Ah, so did Congress support it? Did Congress say in their declaration, no, Mr. President, you can't do this, but we can? Or do they just say, yeah, we agree, Lincoln, and we're going to make a perspective to remove any doubts?
I mean, they didn't really have a ruling on that, but that's kind of the way I read it.
So I guess I can, Jay. So often, Congress doesn't always speak in clear strokes, do they? And sometimes you have to read between the lines to figure out what Congress even thinks. Jay?
I was going to ask, what was the reason more so because of a public policy behind it, because of the public safety?
That Congress did it, or the president?
That the president, well, that Congress supported it.
Well, there were actually, I think this is referenced in your reading, there were sufficient debates among members of Congress about whether the president had the power to do this. And I think Martin's question is a fair one. The general consensus was Lincoln was okay, that Lincoln was acting lawfully, that Congress was out of session, there was an emergency, and he did what he had to do. And if Congress endorsed that based on an ambiguous text, maybe Tony got it right, maybe he got it wrong, I don't know. I go back and forth. This is a tough case. This is a really tough case. I struggle with this case a lot. I truly do. Yeah, actually.
So Congress has the ability to interpret the language of the Constitution?
Oh, absolutely. They do it every day. Let me give you a bad example. So some years ago, what was it? It was a McCain-Feingold campaign finance bill. And President Bush signed it saying, I have doubts about its constitutionality, but let the courts figure this out. No! Members of Congress and the President take an oath to the Constitution just the same as the judges. If a member of Congress thinks a statute's unconstitutional, they should not sign it. They should not vote for it. All people in our government take an oath to the Constitution. And I mentioned this in lunch before, but take an obscure example. When a police officer decides to pat someone down or search them, they're making a decision about the Fourth Amendment, right? When a prosecutor decides to charge someone, right, they're making a decision under the Constitution. When a local housing authority decides to use eminent domain to seize your property, they're making a decision about the Constitution. You don't think about it, but all government actors in the day-to-day activity make constitutional decisions that are never going to be seen by the courts. Never. So, absolutely. If Congress thinks the president acted unconstitutionally, they should have said so. They didn't. They could reprimand the president, right? Right? Congress can censure the president. They can say, you screwed up. That was not done here. Right? So the abstract constitutional question is, again, one I grapple with. I think Tony probably got it right. I think he's right, but you know, I go back and forth. This one's a tough question. Let's actually go into the facts of the case. Adiana, you want to give us the facts, please? And Merryman?
I'm the one who,
Yeah, speak up so I can barely hear anything.
Are you asking for the facts in the case?
Yes, Merryman, please. Thank you.
Okay. So, there is this gentleman, John Merryman from Maryland, and he was arrested by, I'm not sure who arrested him.
Well, he's arrested by the Union Army.
Right, by the
So one thing, Maryland was a border state. So a common misconception is that all the states in the Union were free and all the states in the South were slave. Not so. Maryland was a slave state, but it remained in the Union. And Lincoln recognized that he needed Maryland to stay in the Union because it basically, if you look at geography, it's like this, and the District of Columbia, the federal capital, is in the middle. So it created a buffer between Pennsylvania and Virginia, and it was a very important strategic location. So he basically let the slave states stay in the Union, but he did suspend the writ of habeas corpus there. Okay, Adiana, go ahead, please.
So he was arrested by the Army or military, and Judge
Tawney. Yeah, pretend there's a W in there, like Tawney.
He called for his daughter.
He called for the prisoner to show up, right?
Right.
Yeah. Then what happened?
And
Did the general bring the prisoner to the court?
no, he did not.
No, he did not. What did he tell?
not.
What did he tell Tawny?
He told them, he argued the fact that Lincoln had suspended or the writ of
Yeah.
habeas corpus, and that for the security of the people, that he couldn't produce them.
Okay, then what happened next? Then that gets real interesting.
Tawny
Yeah.
got pretty upset about
He
it.
got pissed. Yeah, just say it.
And, he, it says here that he put it forward somehow, that he put it forward to the, you know what, I didn't understand, and it was part of the study guide question, is why it says he's there a circuit court justice.
Oh, what a beautiful question.
Rather than-
So we've actually fixed this in a subsequent decision. This is Professor Tillman from Ireland, my friend with the long beard. He makes this point in his article. It's not clear what Tawny was doing. Okay, so as a Supreme Court justice, he's also assigned duties to ride circuit, which means he goes to different places. His circuit included Maryland. But it's utterly unclear in what capacity he issued this decision. I have no idea. Literally, what happened was lawyers from Merryman gave papers to Tawny because he lived in Baltimore and said, "Here, deal with this." And Tawny was like, "All right, I'm going to deal with it." But this was not properly before him in any sense at all. There were circuit judges in Maryland where they could have filed a writ, but they went right to Tawny. It's a strange opinion. Your instinct is correct. We actually corrected or clarified the study guide question in 3rd edition, so your confusion is appreciated. But it's, we don't know, and this is Professor Tillman's point, we have no idea why he did what he did. He was trying to make some sort of statement for sure, but there's no jurisdiction. He didn't have jurisdiction over the case. I have no idea.
That was my question.
Your question is correct.
And so, do you want me to continue?
Oh yeah, finish up. You're almost there.
So he placed that forward, his decision or his argument as to why the person should produce the prisoner, and he stated that it was not within the president's powers to suspend the writ of habeas corpus, but rather.
And what did he do with that decision? What did he have done with that decision, I should say?
He presented it forward, and then therefore all the proceedings of the case be filed and recorded in the circuit.
And then what? Keep reading.
Direct transmit a copy under seal to the president.
You see that? You see that, right?
Sent to him.
He sent it to Lincoln, right?
Right.
So thank you, Adiyami. That's very good. This is a very strange case. So Adiyami pointed, I think, the first point. It's not clear what Tawny's jurisdiction was. I have no idea. Seth, we've talked about this. It's not clear exactly what capacity he was even hearing this case. But in the end, right? In the end, he basically said that Lincoln was breaking the law, but I can't release the guy, so send a copy of his opinion to the White House. This was an advisory opinion. He was basically sending Lincoln an opinion of what to do. It's a very, very strange matter. But I want to talk about one aspect. It's often argued that that Lincoln ignored Tawny, right? You'll see this everywhere. Scholars write this, and Professor Tillman has debunked them, I think, persuasively. Lincoln was not aware of this at all. There's no evidence Lincoln ever even got the opinion, right? Maybe it was mailed to the White House. No one even saw it. So Lincoln didn't ignore him, nor could he, because the person in charge was actually the general of the fort. Was a General Cadwalader. So, but the reason why this case is important is it illustrates the weakness of the courts. Adiyami did a good job with the facts, but what happened, right? Court says to General, produce the body, bring him here. General doesn't show up, sends his assistant, says, no, the president gave me this power and I'm going to exercise it. I'm not doing it. Tawny then sends his poor marshal, this poor guy, right, to go arrest the general. Can you imagine, right? You're a marshal. You walk up to a Union Army fort and you go, knock, knock, who's there? I'm here to arrest the general. I want you to picture this in your mind, right? The guy walks up to a fort, and if you go to Fort McHenry, it's this humongous fort. It's really big. And the guy's knocking on the door and be like, all right, I want to arrest the general. He could have gotten shot, right? And then Tawny says, they can summon the posse comitatus, right? Basically, convene a posse to take down the Union fort and to arrest the general. Who's out of his mind, right? And then after all that, the guy doesn't get arrested. So then Tawney basically says, well, I can't really do anything about this, so I'm going to write this opinion and send to Lincoln and hope he deals with it. According to Seth, and I think Seth is right, tell me this, Lincoln was trying to send a message to Tawney was trying to send a message to Lincoln, you can't do this, so stop it. But it's not clear Lincoln ever even saw the opinion. So it's a remarkable case, but it illustrates at once that when a court issues an order and no one follows it, that at once reveals how naked courts are. They're naked. They can't do anything. Remember in Federalist 78, Hamilton said the courts have neither the power of the sword nor the power of the purse. They have just their will and their judgment. All a court can do is write an opinion. And if people don't adhere to that opinion, it's a piece of paper, right? It's have no weight. Okay? Crazy case, David.
I mean, but did Tawney realize that almost immediately himself, because he authorized the marshals and called it the posse comitatus, but then he excused him.
Yeah, it was fake, right? He knew it wasn't going to work.
He realized that there was no...
Of course it's not going to work, right?
No point.
You're basically saying a marshal to arrest the General of the Union Army, right? That's an act of treason of some sort, I think. And this is Seth's theory. Seth said he knew this wasn't going to work, but he was trying to just go through the motions to send a message to Lincoln that you can't do this.
Message that Lincoln probably never got.
Lincoln never, no record Lincoln ever got the message, and even if he did, it's unclear if he would have cared, right? Because again, the writ was not against Lincoln, the writ was against Cadwallader. So Lincoln could not have possibly ignored the order because it didn't affect him, right? This wasn't ordering Lincoln to let the guy free, it was ordering the general to let the guy free. So Lincoln had no role in this at all. It was mostly like an advisory opinion saying, don't do this again. But Lincoln did. Jason?
It seems like, in one instance you could say that it's the weakness of the court, but couldn't it really just be the circumstances of the time? I mean, the nation was at civil war, right? So half the country wasn't part of the country. It was a fairly extreme situation, you know, the most that's any U.S. war because everyone dying was a U.S. citizen. And so couldn't it just be a matter of, and granted, you want the law, even when times are tough, but during times of war, there always seem to be exceptions.
You know, there's a quote, which I think is my next class, but it says, during times of war, the laws fall silent, right? And is the answer just what Jason said, that in times of war, we just look the other way? Or is the answer during times of war, do we have a special sensitivity to the political branches to give greater deference than we would otherwise? It's a tough question. Mark?
Doesn't Congress kind of falling in line with Lincoln's decision around habeas corpus kind of speak to Hamilton's opinion in Federalist No. 70, where he said that when he invoked the argument that the executive has the duty to do that which will preserve peace until Congress figures it out?
Well, say your question again?
So, I mean, isn't basically what Congress did just kind of in line with what Hamilton understood the executive powers to mean in the first place?
Well, I think what Hamilton will say, I think what Hamilton would say is that the executive is unitary, where he has sole powers, right? But the question of whether the president has the power for habeas corpus is contestable, right? So in the president's own spheres, he's unlimited, right? But it's unclear if he has this power at all. But Jackson, I think, would respond as the fact that Congress ratified this suggests the president has this power by himself. They didn't like censure. They didn't try to impeach him. Like, you can imagine alternative. The president suspends habeas corpus. Congress moves to impeach him. It's like, you don't have that power. That didn't happen for sure. It didn't happen. Did anyone object? No. Yeah.
Now, in your last class, you said that Justice Harlan said after the case in Louisiana.
Plessy?
Hans.
Oh, Hans. Okay,
right.
Wrong Louisiana case.
Right.
Russell Harlan.
So he said that his opinion after Hans was that he thought Chisolm was held the right way
At the time. Before the 11th Amendment.
Then an amendment occurred.
Yeah.
And then, 100 years later, basically, the Hans case happened. So, I mean, couldn't they have just kind of followed along with the circuit justice in this case and then passed an amendment?
Why? They just impeach him. Or you're saying if they thought No, you're missing the point, though. If Congress agreed with Lincoln, you wouldn't need an amendment. If Congress agreed the president shares his power, there's no need for an amendment, because they're ratifying his belief. Make sense? Let's go on to another exercise, the Emancipation Proclamation. By the way, I'll talk about Tawney more with you, Dred Scott, but this is a very famous painting of him. And this is a painting of him later in life. Justice Tawney has been under a lot of fire recently because of his opinion in Dred Scott, which, to give you a preview, is that people of African descent could never be U.S. citizens no matter what. That's the nub of the issue. But Tawney was a justice for nearly 3 decades, and he was a very prominent Marylander. And in a number of places in Maryland, there are statues of him and busts. And in the last, month or so since the uprising in Charlottesville, there have been movements to remove memorials throughout the country concerning the Civil War and Confederacy. And there's actually was a statue of Tawney at the capital of Annapolis, Maryland, which was removed. Before this, a couple of years ago, people pouring buckets of a red paint on Tawney. This is a photograph I took in the Supreme Court. And if you ever go to the Supreme Court, which I encourage you all to do, in the Great Hall, it's this humongous hall, there are the busts of all the Chief Justices, lined one after the other. And Tawney's right there. I suspect in my lifetime that we'll see a movement to try to remove this. Here, I think it's probably not a problem because he's there by virtue of being a Chief Justice, not because he's necessarily a good one. But there will probably be some movement to remove him as well. But Tawney, for all his decisions, the opinion in Merryman was probably one of his stranger moments. I think it's a correct opinion, but it's a very weird case. Any other questions on Merryman? Yeah, well, Jackson.
So there's no weight to these Supreme Court opinions? They're just opinions that aren't backed by...
Well, you tell me. When the Supreme Court issues a decision, why do people follow it? Oh, man.
I mean, I don't really have an answer.
Oh, you do not have an answer because you're damn right. There is no answer, right? Justice Breyer often explains that he greets judges visiting from other countries, right? And one of the questions that judges from other countries ask is, why do people follow your rulings, right? It's a good question. And I think the answer is very much bound up with the concept of the rule of law. I'll give you an example. During the 2000 election, the Supreme Court decided to order the halting of certain recounts, finding that they were unconstitutional. As a consequence of that, the recounts finished, and as the vote stood, George Bush won. In hindsight, he would have won anyway. The votes were all there, but they didn't know that at the time. After the Supreme Court decided Bush v. Gore, Al Gore could have said, no, we're going to march on the streets. We're not going to accept this. He didn't. He gave a speech that I think very measured and said, look, we tried our best, we litigated this, we lost, let's move on and accept the court's judgment. And that requires an act of fortitude that people don't quite appreciate. Because in other countries, when an election doesn't go their way, they march in the streets and they have a coup, right? Look at most Latin American nations, how many coups they've had in the last 30 years. It's all, I say awful, but it happens. And courts sometimes halt elections, and then the courts get deposed and judges get assassinated. Fortunately, that hasn't happened in our republic, but there's nothing stopping it. I mean, it's a very precarious balance. Any other questions on Merryman? All right, let's look at the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, all of you probably heard of the Emancipation Proclamation. You probably all learned that Lincoln freed the slaves. Not quite. It's actually a little bit more complicated than that. So first off, John, in the 1860s, right, did Congress have the power to free the slaves?
Through amendment?
I didn't say amendment. I said, did Congress have the power to free slaves?
Considering certain interpretations of the Constitution, there's no mention of slavery specifically.
That's true. But under the law.
Oh, enumeration.
Well, under the law, what were slaves considered in most states, or many states?
Laborers?
Property.
Property.
What happens if the government takes a piece of property?
Due process.
And what do you have to provide?
Compensation.
Compensation, right? If the government, I know this is a grotesque thought, but this is actually a legal argument. If the government wanted to emancipate the slaves, they would be effectively seizing private property and have to provide compensation. Moreover, you haven't read the case yet, but in the Dred Scott decision, Chief Justice Taney ruled, the same Taney, the same guy, ruled that Congress lacked the power to eliminate slavery because it violates due process. That slave owners actually have a property right, a property interest in their slaves. And it's an unconstitutional deprivation of due process to deprive them of that. So here we have again a decision from the Supreme Court saying that Congress cannot emancipate slaves. And if they try to, they have to pay compensation. Okay. Rachel, did Lincoln agree or comport with that notion of Dred Scott in his Emancipation Proclamation? Did he disregard the court's order? The court said you can't free slaves. It's not within Congress's power.
I think he kind of skirted around it.
Skirted around it, okay.
Yeah, he didn't please both sides with it. He didn't want to alienate like Maryland and the neighboring states, but at the same time, I think he wanted to do what his party wanted him to do. So, specifically, he says, henceforth all slaves shall be free in the executive government.
Free where? Where were the slaves freed? Was it all throughout the country?
It says, held as slaves within said designated states and parts
now,
of states.
Which states did he select? You didn't pick everywhere, you picked certain states. Generally speaking, these are SEC states, but
Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, and then he has exceptions.
Roll Tide, right? He picked mostly southern states, right?
Yeah.
Why did he pick those states, Rachel? Why would he pick those states in particular? What was going on here?
Well, it was during the onset of the Civil War. So
why what? Let me ask the question differently, Rachel. What power gave Lincoln the ability to free those slaves? Dred Scott said Congress is on this power.
He was.
What was the president acting on?
Commander-in-Chief.
Okay.
So it was wartime power.
Yeah, but we're in the United States, right? Why those states? Why war powers?
Because the Union was at war with the South.
Did Lincoln ever say we were in a civil war? How did he describe it? This is an important point. How did Lincoln describe the conflict? Lacey, you want to take a stab?
How did you describe the complex?
Yeah.
The South versus the Union?
Yeah. Did Lincoln ever acknowledge it was a civil war? What did he see the southern states doing?
Rebellion?
Rebellion. That's a key word, right? Lincoln saw the southern states in rebellion, right? That's how he viewed the situation. So he only issued the Emancipation Proclamation for the places in rebellion, right? And actually it wasn't all parts. So, for example, West Virginia was excluded. There were actually some parishes in Louisiana that remained loyal to the Union, which is not well known, but they lived in parishes. So Lincoln was using his war power to free the slaves in the rebelling territories, in the rebelling counties, right? Let's see, can't see your name tag. You gotta write dark in that, I can't read that. Yeah, you gotta use a marker to make it. Ben, where in the Constitution does it say the president can seize, can free slaves during rebel territory? That lists anywhere in the Constitution?
No, that's implied power.
Implied power. How do you know it's implied power?
Because
Good, everyone heard what he said. Repeat aloud. I tried to barely heard you. I'm saying happy away.
The president is required to do everything within his power to maintain
The what?
the laws, right?
Oh, I thought you were going to say something else. The Union.
Well,
Lincoln profoundly believed that his primary mission was to save the Union. And the Constitution gave him the power to take the steps necessary to save the Union. And he thought he had the power to free the slaves. Now, the way he did it is not often well appreciated. And the reason why is it's not very popular. Let's say, I'll give you an example, right? Daniel, you're the Union general, right? And you come across a southern, warehouse full of munitions and bullets and guns. And you're a Union general. What are you going to do to those munitions? And what are you going to do with them? Yeah, right? Or if you were a Union general, you came across a farm that had some food and your troops are hungry, right? What are you going to do? Are you going to ask Congress for permission? No. Everyone agree with that? Lincoln saw the slaves the same way. He basically said, this is property in the rebel territories. I am seizing it on behalf of the Union Army. And once he seized it, he can then liberate the slaves, right? Lincoln said, I am seizing the species of property, chattel slavery. And once it's in Union possession, I can then emancipate them. Everyone get what it's a strange concept, right? But Lincoln said, I don't have the power to simply seize them because they're slaves. But since they're property in rebel territory, I can. And if you don't believe me, right? After the Civil War, a number of slave owners actually brought claims against the government asking for compensation for their slaves. They said, you seize my property, pay me. The 14th Amendment, you can look it up. The 14th Amendment actually says that no compensation can be paid for seized property during the Civil War. They were talking about slaves, right? So what Lincoln said is, I have the power to seize property the same way I would seize a warehouse full of rifles. I'm applying that doctrine to the slaves. And once the slaves were in Union possession, then they could emancipate them and make them free. And in fact, one thing Lincoln did was said, if you flee and come to the Union, we can put you in the Union Army, and once you're in the Union Army, we'll free you and your families, right? Emancipating a slave in the southern states had no effect because they were still in bondage. But if they were to get to the north, they put him in service in the military, and then they could free him that way. Several hands, yeah.
So I realize this is a very 2017 argument on an 1800s problem, but could he have said something like, hey, we never should have called people property to begin with, and therefore not a violation of the Fifth Amendment?
Well, isn't that saying Dred Scott's wrong? We have a decision from Tawney, the same guy we were talking about 5 minutes ago. Now, Lincoln is often said to have said, let me say that again, I said that poorly. Many scholars argue that Lincoln ignored Dred Scott. He didn't. He actually did something a lot more savvy. Again, Lincoln was a lawyer. He argued before the Supreme Court. He was a smart guy. What Lincoln said is, Dred Scott v. Sanford, right? You haven't read it yet, but you will. Was a conflict between Dred Scott, slave, and Sanford, the master. He said, I will only read Dred Scott as applying to that case and nowhere else. In other words, he said we're limited to its facts. It was only a dispute between those two parties, not binding on anyone else. Wait a second. And they say, wait a minute, Josh, is that insane? Aren't Supreme Court decisions binding on everyone everywhere? Like once the Supreme Court rules on the marriage laws in 4 states, doesn't that automatically bind all 50 states? I actually agree with Lincoln. I think the Supreme Court's judgments are only binding on the parties there. People can follow them as a matter of precedent, but they're not required to do so. But the irony is, when Lincoln said Dred Scott was between a slave and his master, therefore only those two parties are bound, Arkansas, after Brown v. Board, said the same thing. Brown, student. Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas, state. Arkansas, we were not part of that case, therefore not bound by Brown. So if you think Lincoln's right, I actually do think Lincoln was right, then Arkansas is saying we're not bound by Brown has to also be right. Conversely, if you think that Arkansas is wrong, that they were bound to immediately desegregate, then Lincoln was also bound by Dred Scott. And the Emancipation Proclamation, it was illegal. not easy questions. You don't know which side you want to be on. It's a hard question. Martin, your instinct exactly right. These are not, betwixt the two positions, I don't know where I'd want to be. I saw a hand, so I think Andrew was first.
Well, I just had a quick question. So, Lincoln, it was more similar to like manumission than emancipation then.
What do you mean by manumission? I want to get your terminology straight.
That he like took ownership of the
Yes,
slaves
yes.
and freed them.
Yes, right. It basically is, he could not nullify state law. So if you were a slave in, say, South Carolina, Lincoln couldn't nullify that state law. But he said, if you make it to the North, I will manumission. Manumission is basically, you're taking ownership to free a person, right? He could do that. But the Emancipation Proclamation had a very narrow effect, right? It wasn't until the 13th Amendment was ratified after the war that all slavery in the United States was in theory was supposed to stop. Didn't exactly work that way. That was actually the plan. So I have somewhere here.
No, I was just going to say, does it have to be a matter of, we have the ability to change the law.
Just wait.
The Congress.
Congress
can change laws.
What laws?
Federal laws. But also they can begin the process of amending the Constitution.
So if Congress wants to disagree with Dred Scott, what do they have to do?
Probably amend the Constitution.
Was that done here?
Yes.
Well, later, right?
Right.
Not when Lincoln acted.
But for Lincoln, in terms of what he did, it doesn't necessarily have to be opposed to Dred Scott. I mean, like you said, he treated him as property, but beyond that, as the commander-in-chief, it talks about how the slaves were supporting the Confederate Army.
The commander-in-chief is subject to the Fifth Amendment. The commander-in-chief cannot deprive people of life, liberty, or property. That's due process of law. What Lincoln did was very much in tension with Dred Scott, but with the wrinkle that I'm doing this as a matter of seizing rebel property. And that, perhaps Martin's comment wasn't very politically correct, but that's how he had to argue it. There were extensive debates, and I'll move on to Curtis now, right? Curtis actually wrote the dissent in Dred Scott, Justice Curtis. And he resigned after that, 'cause he was so angry at Tawney. Curtis was an abolitionist, right? He was opposed to slavery, but he said, look, Lincoln doesn't have this power to free the slaves. This was a very contested issue at the time. I mean, even among the Republican Party, which was basically created to destroy slavery, that was like the platform of the Republican Party in 1860. They recognized that the president's implied powers do not go this far. All right. These are not easy questions, and they're decided during a time when, there was a war raging. Thousands and thousands of people were dying on the battlefield, right? And then you're making these very tough constitutional decisions, which are easy enough for us to study now, 100-something years later in a classroom. But when you're on the front line, these are not easy questions. Yeah, Aaron.
I just want to be clear. So after the Emancipation Proclamation, that only applied to the rebel states. So
Yes, sir.
A state like Maryland,
Slavery continued that? Yeah, nothing.
until the 13th Amendment?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So, were persons and states of rebellion protected by the Constitution?
Yeah. Yeah. Unless,
I mean,
unless,
they're an armed
so
antagonist.
this is a question of habeas corpus, right? Can habeas corpus be suspended in the rebel territories if a person be arrested without processing, right? But the Constitution still applies even in rebel territories.
But to add on to what Ben was just saying, the Constitution only protected those persons, being that slaves were not there.
And under Dred Scott, they were not.
Right.
Exactly. So actually, the property claim wasn't for the slave, but for the owners.
Exactly.
Right. That's what Lincoln was worried about, because Lincoln was afraid that one of these Southern, person will go to court and say, you're violating Dred Scott. But again, Lincoln was very smart, right? You don't always have to agree with him, but he thought through these constitutional issues at great length. And he said, I can't ignore Dred Scott, that would be a bad idea. But I can tap dance around it. So it's over there. Yeah.
Was this is a kind of a side question, but was the Civil War itself then legal? Like, did Lincoln legally have the right to send soldiers?
Oh, ask me after class. That's a really tough question. I can argue about it for hours. there was no declaration because Lincoln never thought it was a war. He said, I'm putting down rebellion. And the president can call forth militia to put down rebellion. That's how Lincoln viewed it.
So, but they just want militia, this was the army.
And they had a draft to expand the federal militia. Yeah, Mark.
Is the correct date of the Emancipation Proclamation January 1st or September 22nd, 1862?
I have no idea. Why?
Because in the first sentence he says...
Is there a typo in the book?
Well, I think it's generally recognized as January 1st, 1863, but the first sentence right there says, whereas on the 22nd day of September in the year of 1862.
He wrote it, issued it at that
Issued it at that point.
Oh, I can't hear multiple voices. You guys, one at a time. David, I'm sorry. I heard multiple voices and like I had this foggy hearing.
I thought what Mark said was true, but I thought that like he made it happen. It's like a little grace period.
You know, I'm really not sure. If anyone wants to look this up, email me after class. I'd be happy to check it. The textbook goes to the publisher like next week. So if they can clarify, I will.
He issued the proclamation on September 22nd, but it was to take effect on January 1st.
Oh. Got it? Thank you. That's not right, David?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm sorry. my hearing, I'm having a really hard time. It's actually the Sudafed's making it worse. Progressively, I'm hearing less and less throughout this class. I'm not sure if it's gonna pop eventually. I'm not sure I'll hear everything. I mentioned this in my last class, but it's actually easier to buy meth at night than it is to buy Sudafed. Because once the CVS pharmacy closes, you can't buy Sudafed over the counter. So there's actually a paper somewhere that if you can synthesize meth back into pseudoephedrine. It's easier to buy that at night than it's actually buy Sudafed. Thank you, Breaking Bad, right?
Yeah.
All right. What's that? Yeah, Case Lawson, the failed chemistry professor, right? No, I failed chemistry. I was not very good. I'm not good with I burn stuff and I'm bad. I'll kill myself. All right. Any questions on emancipation? All right. Let's move on to the last case for today. Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company versus Sawyer. And this is probably one of the most important cases of the 20th century. The reason why this is one of the most important cases of the 20th century is we have a situation where the president's executive powers were challenged, and the court actually told the president no. Almost all the time when the president takes an action and it's challenged in courts, the courts look the other way. They say, well, there's no standing to challenge it, it's not justiciable, it's a political question, the president has the power, etc., etc. But Youngstown stands alone in a case where the courts told the president, no, you can't do this. And they said this during the time of an actual war. Perhaps not a declared war, but an actual war with Korea. So that's why this case is so significant. So, Andre, were you up next, I think? Give me the facts, please, in Youngstown.
The Korean War was going on. Truman sent troops with, steelworkers planned to strike, while Truman, who thought that the strike would hurt the war effort, tried to take possession of steel mills. The next morning, the president sent a message to Congress supporting his action.
Okay, good enough. I'll fill it in. This is a favorite case of mine. So, the issue in this case concerned the Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company in Youngstown, Ohio. And these are actually photographs of the actual steel mill that was at issue there. There we go. There was a labor dispute. The union gave notice that they were going to have a strike, a nationwide strike, not just at this mill, but at steel mills across the country. President Truman determined that if the steel workers went on strike, there would be a shortage of steel for the war effort in Korea, and that it would significantly hamper the ability to fight the war. That probably wasn't true, but we'll get back to that later. So Truman did something remarkable. He ordered his Secretary of Commerce, Charles Sawyer, that's who the Sawyer is, right? He ordered his Secretary of Commerce, Charles Sawyer, to seize the steel mills, to take ownership of the steel mills and put them under federal supervision. Now, what does it mean for a steel mill to be under federal supervision? Well, usually if a worker goes on strike, he pickets outside and it's like, whatever, he goes on strike. When your place of employment is owned by the U.S. military and you start picketing, they're going to arrest you and throw you in jail. If you try calling in sick, they're going to arrest you and throw you in jail. That is how Truman reacted. Now, Jonathan, let's stop the facts here for a minute. Do you see the reason why we put this case right after the Emancipation Proclamation? I actually had a little argument with my co-author Randy Barnett about it. It's like, why are you putting Youngstown here? And he explained to me and eventually prevailed on me. I didn't see it at first, but why is Youngstown put right after Lincoln and Emancipation? It's not a usual place to put it at all, but I think it fits. Oh, you're gonna have to talk louder. I'm really sorry.
It has to do with like how Congress viewed government's actions.
Okay. Okay. But what's the bigger issue here? Why is this put right after Youngstown, Jonathan, or Emancipation Proclamation? What's a similar thread between the Emancipation Proclamation and Youngstown?
Private property.
What about private property? Okay. Right. I mean, I didn't realize this until I started talking to Randy about this, but the parallels are strong, right? In both cases, the president is seizing private property under his war powers. Right? In either case was compensation provided. So, I mean, you may think it's absolutely jarring to say, you know, the slave is private, but here is legitimately private property. Is Lincoln's emancipation of the slaves actually a precedent for seizing the mills during the time of rebellion? Right? It's a question presented here. We'll come back to that in a minute. Elizabeth, after Truman ordered his Secretary of Commerce to seize the steel mills, what happened next? You're exactly right. Congress did what they always do, which is absolutely nothing, right? Truman sent over a message, and they said, hey, you guys, I took over this steel mill. If you want to do something, that's cool. Otherwise, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, right? And Congress did? No, they didn't do anything. Did they impeach him? Right? No. Did they try and censure him? No. They didn't do anything at all. What did happen is that the owner of the steel mill went to federal court. And the owner of the steel mill asked a federal judge to, free the mills. And actually, I think I have in my notes that they went to a judge's house, like basically in the middle of the night, and they basically knocked on this guy's door. It's like, do something. The same way with Taney, right? They literally went to Taney and said, do something. And a federal judge said, let's have a hearing the next day at 11:30. And that judge, in a remarkable opinion of fortitude, whether he was right or wrong, we can discuss, but in a remarkable opinion of fortitude, the judge said that the seizure was unconstitutional. That the president did not have the power to take over the mills. And the judge issued an injunction barring the president from taking over the mills. And the judge didn't put it on hold during the appeals process, which is remarkable. I think a day or two later, maybe even the same day, the Court of Appeals, the D.C. Circuit said, okay, this is above our pay grade. So they said, we're going to put the judge's order on hold if you appeal to the Supreme Court, like, tomorrow. So let me give you the chronology, right? Truman issued the order, okay, on April 8th. Okay? April 8th. A district court issued the injunction on April 30th. So we're talking 12 days. So the order was April 8th. April 30th, the judge issued the order. By May 2nd, the case was before the Supreme Court. Arguments were scheduled 10 days later. So arguments were on May 12th. The case was argued over the course of 2 days, May 12th and 13th. It was decided on June 2nd. So from start to finish, we're like talking about like 2 months. Remarkable. A remarkable sequence of events. Okay? So everyone get like the urgency of this case. Basically from top to bottom, they went to the Supreme Court in 2 months, which is a remarkable sequence. All right, Zach. I want to now walk through the various opinions of the justices. Now, the majority opinion by Justice Hugo Black, it's a majority opinion, but it's not the most influential. Justice Jackson's opinion is the most influential. But what is Justice Black's position here, Zach?
Let's just look at the text of the Constitution.
Okay.
I mean, if this power, the president's powers come from the Constitution or statute.
Very good. So the holding of Justice Black's opinion, right, is the president only has the powers that come from the Constitution or a statute, right? The Constitution or a statute. But that's not a very satisfying argument, because let's go back to our first question of the day. We said the president has inherent powers that aren't limited. So that's not a satisfying answer. But Black's opinion is basically this. Which branch of government has the power to seize property? Congress. If Congress wanted to seize the steel mills, they could have done so. And they would have had to provide compensation for the owners. But the president doesn't have the power to seize the mills. And although there are certain statutes passed, none of them concern the power of the president to seize private property, right? Congress considered this issue and did not give the president that power. Right? So, according to Black, unless the president has the power from the statute or from the Constitution, he can't act. Right? Black is what we might call a formalist, right? He's very strict. He says, unless it's in a statute or Congress, there's no answer, right? There's no power here. Okay, so any questions on Justice Black? Okay. The second justice is Felix Frankfurter. Felix Frankfurter, before he came to the bench, was a Harvard law professor. He was much more influential as a professor than he was as a justice, which is somewhat unique. He drove his colleagues nuts because he still acted like a law professor, not a judge. In fact, he was reported during conference to always speak for 40 minutes at a time, because that's how long classes were at Harvard. He would just speak for 40 minutes uninterrupted, and people didn't like him very much. He had a lot of conflicts with his colleagues. Anthony, what is Justice Black's argument, Anthony? I'm sorry, Justice Frankfurter. By the way, Frankfurter's law clerks called the hot dogs. Get it? Hot dogs, Frankfurter. Anthony, go.
He focused on like checks and balances.
Okay, good.
And like Congress was very familiar with governmental seizure.
Good.
And that they explicitly didn't give that power to the president.
Yeah. So if Frankfurter looks at the statute and says, look, Congress considered whether giving the president the power to seize a mill to avert a labor crisis. They considered the issue, and they decided not to, right? They specifically withheld that power. And that's significant, right? This is not like Lincoln took issued the, what do you call it, the habeas corpus thing, and Congress ratified it, right? Here, Congress considered the issue and said, no, we're not going to do that. If you want that power, come back to us, right? If you want the power to seize the mills, come to Congress, don't act unilaterally. Any questions on Frankfurter? All right, let's move on. Case. Justice Douglas. Justice Douglas was also a law professor, but at Yale. He was perhaps most famous for his infidelity. He was married several times to a couple of his secretaries. He would be married for years and dump them for a younger secretary. It became a pattern at some point. In fact, his ambitions to be president were probably defeated by the fact that he was divorcee. At the time, being a divorcee was considered, so scandalous that he couldn't even run for office. Times have changed. Case, what did Justice Douglas say?
Well, he agreed that it was an emergency, but the emergency did not create power.
Very good.
He acknowledged that the president could act more quickly, but he didn't have that power to do that.
Yeah, I was doing a debate a year or two, I can't remember what it was, and some student at law school said, well, can't the president act because it's an emergency? And I said, What are you talking about, right? The fact that it's an emergency doesn't give the president extra powers. I think Justice Douglas articulates this well. An emergency does not create powers, right? There may be an emergency, steel shortage, but if it was such an emergency, go to Congress, right? Ask Congress for a bill saying, pass this bill so I can take the steel mills. Now, what if Congress didn't pass it though? And what if indeed there was a shortage of steel? And what if the government could determine that people were dying on the battlefield in Korea because they didn't get bullets, right? They didn't have their tanks built. They didn't have enough planes. It's really easy for a judge to sit here in Washington, D.C. and make these rulings. But there was a lot of counterweight to that. That if you shut this down and the war goes on for a number of years, which it did, and the steel strike goes on for months, years, who knows? What if people start dying in the battlefield? Not easy questions, right? How do you, as a judge, tell the government, no, you're wrong, this emergency is not that bad? So there's a certain tension when the courts tell the executive that you're wrong about national security, even though the government has far more knowledge than the courts ever will. Keep this in mind when we do Korematsu next week, or next class, and we talk about Justice Murphy's dissent. He ruled that the exclusion order of Korematsu was void. And he says, there is no risk from these people. He was right. He was right in hindsight, but how did he know that at the time? All right, let's go into Justice Jackson. Now, Justice Jackson I want to dwell on for a moment. He is probably one of the greatest writers in the court of all time. I put my top 5 for sure. Underrated because he didn't write that many significant opinions that we studied today, but this is one of them. Give you a little background. Justice Jackson took a leave from the Supreme Court to be the head prosecutor at Nuremberg. Basically, the president appointed to go prosecute the Nazis at Nuremberg. One other fun fact, I don't have it here. Justice Jackson's law clerk that term was a guy by the name of William Rehnquist. The future Chief Justice clerked for Jackson this year. And Rehnquist didn't like Jackson very much. It's an odd relationship because he disagreed with his opinion. Right? It was an odd relationship. But Jackson's opinion is a concurring opinion, but it's been considered by most justices to be the defining opinion. In fact, you'll read for class next week, Daines and Morby Regan, where the court basically says, yeah, Black is nice, but Jackson's better, right? Black is good, whatever, but we're going to go for Justice Jackson. So you have to study Jackson's concurring opinions very closely, and I'll walk through it because we're a little bit short on time. Jackson was the Attorney General during the Roosevelt administration. He was there on the front lines as FDR made some very difficult decisions. And what that experience taught Jackson is there are not easy questions. There are not easy answers to the separation of powers. There really aren't. So his framework, which is used in a lot of cases, by the way, law students love applying this framework to everything. It drives me nuts, right? It drives me nuts. I'll have students apply Justice Jackson's framework to the Commerce Clause. Drives me crazy. Don't do it. If you do it, I'll give you a bad score, I promise. It's wrong. But in the separation of powers context, where Jackson says, does the president have the power to act? We look to a couple things. Where is Congress? And where is the president? Think back to the Emancipation Proclamation, right? And the suspension of habeas corpus. Lincoln did it, and by all accounts, Congress agreed. What does that mean? The president's acting with his own powers, plus he's acting with the president's The president's acting with his own powers, and he's also acting with the powers of Congress. So you take the president's powers plus powers of Congress. That's a lot of powers, right? That's like the full extent of the U.S. government. What happens when the president acts and Congress says no? Right? The president takes an action using his own powers, and Congress says no. In those cases, all you have are the executive powers, but you have zero congressional powers. What Jackson says is that the courts, when they're scrutinizing the separation of powers, should put a lot of weight in how the president and Congress balance out. That is, if the President and the Congress are acting on the same page, the court should give a very lax scrutiny, what we might call rational basis review, right? The court should not be willing to second guess it. That doesn't mean it's constitutional, right? That does not mean it's constitutional, but what it does mean is the courts aren't going to scrutinize it closely. Okay? But the flip side is, when the Congress tells the President no, and the President does it anyway, that means the court should look at it even more closely, because you only have one branch of government. So you have these tiers, right, where Congress and the President are on the same page, you give it like a rational basis review. Or Congress and the President are on opposite pages, you give it a little bit more of a strict scrutiny. And you have this middle region, right, which we call the zone of twilight. What does that mean? Well, you all know the TV show The Twilight Zone, if you've heard of it, where it's not quite night, not quite day, you don't really know what time it is, right? He says there are going to be some cases that are close calls. And maybe this is Martin's question before. Did Congress actually agree with the suspension? Maybe yes, maybe not. So when Jackson says in these close cases where it's not really clear what's going on, courts should maybe be a little bit more cautious but not go all the way in. And these three tiers, what are called the Jackson tiers, and they're quite popular, have been the definitive way that the court has assessed whether an action is constitutional. They've modified it a bit, you'll see next class. But Jackson's opinion provides the rule of the case here, I think. So, did Congress authorize the steel seizures? No. Is there any ambiguity about it? No. Why? Because Congress specifically declined to give the President this power. So here we're in the third tier, right? We're at the lowest ebb, as Jackson calls it. And because we're at the lowest ebb, the court will scrutinize it closely, and the court will say, look, the President does not have the power to seize property. This is a power for Congress, therefore the seizures are unconstitutional. So question about Jackson. Questions about Jackson? Oh, I'm sorry. My senses are all messed up. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Is this our test? Is his opinion?
What do you mean our test?
Like the test that we're supposed to use, like on an exam?
Well, I think it's very useful for you to apply. Don't overuse it. In the past, students overuse it, but if you're in a separation of powers question, Jackson will be influential. And I'm somewhat dancing around your question now because we'll see next week in a case called Dames and Morby Regan how the court extends it. But Jackson has prevailed. This is the better of the opinions. No one ever cites black. Yes.
Would you mind fleshing out the three tiers a little bit more? I was kind of confused.
I'd be happy to. Right? So the first tier, right? The very first tier. You have the President and the Congress acting together. They agree. The President's power is at its maximum. And because the President's power is at its maximum, courts put minimal scrutiny. Okay? The second tier is what's called the zone of twilight. And under the zone of twilight, Congress hasn't said yes, they haven't said no. It's ambiguous, right? Here Jackson basically says, I don't know, case by case basis, right? It's not a hard and fast rule. The third tier is what's called the President's authority as its lowest ebb, where the President is acting only on his own authority, without any authority from Congress. And here the court will, quote, scrutinize with caution the action. But these aren't hard and fast categories, which is why I encourage you to apply them, but be realistic about it. It's seldom the case where you have a case where the President takes an action that's clearly authorized, no one's going to challenge it. And generally, if the President takes an action that's not authorized, he's going to lose. The hard cases fall in the middle. Oh man, my ears are killing me. I can barely hear at this point, but I'll keep going. I got 5 minutes left. I'll plow through. That's why I'm actually lecturing more, because it's hard for me to. Jay is close by, I can hear her. But it's hard for me to hear. I once did a lecture where I had my ears popped. I could hear a damn question. I did the entire lecture basically deaf, I suppose, but it was not easy. All right. Let me do the dissenting opinions. The vote was not unanimous. The vote was 6-3. And ironically, all the justices that Truman appointed dissented. That's how these things work, right? And the dissents basically made the point that we're in extraordinary times. and the court should not be interfering with the exercise of this power. And they cite Chief Justice Vinson's dissent. He cites, look, Lincoln seized telegraph and railroad lines, right? Jefferson made the Louisiana Purchase. There are lots of instances where in times of crisis the president exercised powers that may not have been his. He cites Federalist 70 in Hamilton, saying we need a vigorous and energetic president. Okay? Lots of other presidents have done something far worse, right? The seizure of steel mills is pretty trivial. So the dissenter said we should not be intervening in this basis. Okay? Now, the aftermath of this case is fascinating. It's a study in how our republic usually works itself out. Within minutes of the court's ruling, Truman ordered the Secretary of Commerce to relinquish the mills. This is like Al Gore, right? Did Truman have to comply with this order? What if he hadn't? Would Justice Jackson have walked up to Youngstown, Ohio, and knocked on the door and tried to arrest the general? Or arrest the Secretary of Commerce? No. But Truman, he did it, right? He said, okay, give him back the steel mills. The strike lasted about 50 days, almost a month and a half. Did the country fall apart? Not really. They had enough steel to make all the war stuff. So the government's explanation was probably exaggerated, right? Truman was irate at the decision. He was very angry. But no hard feelings. And there's this great story, which might be true, but I don't know. It's maybe apocryphal. Where Justice Black, who was from Alabama, invited Truman over. And he goes, Hugo, I don't much care for your law, but by golly, this bourbon is good. So even after this dispute, the branches seem to reconcile a bit. But what I want you to take away from these cases, Merryman and Youngstown, as well as the Emancipation Proclamation material, is that the powers of the executive are not clearly defined. And in order to define those powers, you need to look at Congress, not just the courts. And this is Jackson's teaching, right? To understand the legitimacy of the executive's actions, is it something that Congress approved of or not? So any questions? I will see you on Friday. There's no class on Thursday. We're in 414 at 2 o'clock. And hopefully have another nice day. If you can't make it Friday, watch it and email me.
Do we need to put anything special to tell you we want?
Just tell me. I'll take honor system. Thank you all.